We got to remember where we came from. The Apostle Paul reminds his readers who you were before Christ saved us. In verse number 11, he says, you were called the uncircumcised by those who were called the circumcised. That's the Jews. We're talking to the Gentiles, and it's a derogatory term. The Jews thought that because I've had a physical thing done to me, I'm in good standing with God. That because of an external thing that I have done, man, me and God, we are together. And when I look at you who are Gentile and uncircumcised, because you didn't have a surgery, God doesn't want to have anything to do with you. God doesn't want to be in relationship with you. And the Apostle Paul kind of says, wait a minute, no. You're both far from God. That if you have external activity without an internal heart change, you're no closer to God than anyone else. That it's not the external things we do, it's what's happening in my heart. In our culture today, we would say church attenders versus non-church attenders, or prayers versus non-prayers, or people that do the right things versus people that don't do the right things. If I do all the right things, but if my heart is far from God, then I'm still not in connection with him. That I can have all of the activity, but if I'm not in relationship with him, well, then I'm no better than somebody that doesn't even try, that doesn't even work towards being what Jesus has called them to be. I'm distant from him because my heart is not there. That growing up in a Christian home does not automatically mean that I'm going to be a follower of Jesus. And being a person that checks all of the religious boxes does not mean that I am a person who's following Jesus. That it's an internal thing. So the Apostle Paul says, I want you to remember, before we go any further and before we try to make the two groups one, you both have to recognize what your state was before Jesus came on the picture. He said it this way in verse number 12, Remember that at that time you were separate from Christ. Listen how dire this is. Excluded from citizenship in Israel, foreigners to the covenants of the promise. You were without hope. You were without God in the world. And you know the same is true for us. That until I cross that line of faith, before I become a person that is fully devoted my life to Jesus and what he is leading and where he's calling me to, I'm without hope. I'm without Christ. That word without God in the world, that's where we get our word atheist from. And it's not that they didn't believe in God, it's just that they weren't following God. And some of us, we try to find our hope and we try to find our purpose in all of these things, but the Apostle Paul says, until your heart becomes softened to what Jesus has wanted you to do, you are without hope. You are without Christ in the world. You're just searching your way through the darkness. But because of what Jesus has done, that doesn't have to be your reality going forward. And so he says, remember. And why is it important that we remember? Because I can be, especially for someone like me who I followed Jesus for decades now at this point. And the Apostle Paul says to somebody like me, and maybe somebody like you need to remember. It is unwise for us to forget where we came from, because remembering helps me to avoid pride. Remembering helps me to recognize, it wasn't me who got me to my current state. It wasn't my good behavior. It wasn't my church attendance. I've got to remember that I was without hope. I was without Christ because of my sin, and Jesus came and did something on my behalf. I didn't get there on my own. Remembering helps me avoid pride, and remembering it fuels my gratitude. That's why I can come into a worship service like this, and it doesn't matter to me whether I like the songs or if I don't like the songs. When I remember my former state and I remember what Christ has done for me, man, I am just filled with gratitude. And I can come into a place like this, and even if they don't sing the songs that I want or the style that I want, or even if the preacher, yours truly, doesn't preach a very good message and fumbles, it doesn't make any difference, because I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful because I was without hope. I was without Christ. When I remember my past hopelessness, I'm filled with gratitude. Wow, God, you didn't have to do that for me. You didn't have to come to my defense. You didn't have to give up yourself for me. And so I'm filled with gratitude. And then, and this is maybe the most important, that it strengthens compassion. Because when I remember that I was far from God, it helps me to have empathy and compassion and love for others that are also far from God. It can be so easy for me to say, well, I'm in good shape. They need to do better. I'm doing good. I wish they would be like me. But when I remember, now there was a time that I was without hope. I was without Christ. It fuels my compassion and my love and my empathy for other people that are different than me, that aren't following Christ. And I go into the world with purpose. I go into the world with mission. Because of what I used to be and Christ redeemed me, I can go in and be the light of the world. It's what Jesus has invited us to do. And so I remember my former condition.